My name's David. I make furniture in the back of my photography studio in Jersey City. Last summer has been really good to us. It provided us with great memories, beautiful moments, and lots of plants. And then winter came. But that doesn't mean the plants went anywhere. We have maybe a little too many plants in our home. And some of those plants are sitting on the ground by a cold, drafty window, and they need a better place to live, which is why I'm going to make them this wedged mortise and tenon bookshelf. It'll consist of 6 shelves and 4 long stretchers that act as legs, and it'll be put together with wedged mortise and tenon joints. And it'll look something like this. But first, we need to make it. And we start with, you guessed it, picking up the wood. For this piece, I went with white oak. Aesthetically, I thought it would really match the vibe of the piece, and I've worked with it a ton of times, so I'm super comfortable with it. Milling is maybe one of the most important steps of the process. It starts you off with boards that are the same thickness and boards that have perfect parallel edges at a 90 degree. I like to put sticks and create gaps in between my milled boards to avoid any warpage or movement. To make the 2 long legs on the side of the piece, I wanted to use one wide board and rip it down the center. This way, when it was assembled, all the grain matched and it looked really cohesive. Now it's time to rough cut everything to size. When woodworking, I try to use my brain as little as humanly possible, which is why I try to make a lot of cuts at the same time and reference already cut edges to cut more edges. This ensures that everything is perfectly accurate. Before I cut the legs to length, and since I'll have them together, now's a good time to mark out where all the mortise holes will be. When I mark one, I mark all of them, and it ensures that everything is in the exact same place and there'll be no complications during assembly. I also cut them to length, ensuring that everything is exactly the same. For this project, we're using a wedged mortise and tenon joint, which consists of a rectangular pin with 2 relief cuts about 1 millimeter in from the pin. That pin will go into a rectangular slot with a 15-degree slope. When I drive a wedge into those reliefs, it'll drive those thinner pieces of the pin outwards, which will seat itself inside of that 15-degree sloped mortise and create a permanent joint. Time to cut those tenons. Once I establish where I want the first cuts to be, I clamp a reference block to my jig. This doesn't only help the cut remain exactly where I want it, but it means that when I flip the piece over, I could have perfect symmetrical cuts. Since I have so many pins to make, this is really important in terms of efficiency and accuracy. I do the same thing for the cuts on the inside. Then I remove all the waste. Next, I thin the pins by about 1 millimeter total. This is so that when they sit in the mortises, they sit against that ledge and it looks really flush and clean. Time to mark out the holes where the reliefs will go. The reason you make these holes is so that when you drive the wedge in, it doesn't create a crack all the way down the piece. I take the piece to the bandsaw, where I set up the fence exactly where I want it. I cut down to that relief, and all I need to do is flip the piece and do it again. I do the same thing for the inside. I really can't stress enough how important these processes are in systematizing everything. It really helps make everything efficient and super accurate. Time to cut the mortises. I remove the bulk of the material with a Forstner bit that's just a little bit undersized to the width of the mortise. This reduces the amount of chisel work that I need to do. I always make sure that the chisels I use are extremely sharp. Since the joint is the main design detail of this piece, I want to make sure that my lines are perfect and clean. I take my time working up to the line, and again I make sure that I use sharp chisels, and if they're not sharp, I sharpen them as much as I can. During this piece, I think I sharpened in between every single mortise. I needed to make 24 of these, which was honestly a test of my patience. I made sure that when I was working on them that I was in a good state of mind to be focused and present. I feel like when I work on projects like this, you invest so much time into it that if you show up and you're not fully there, you could really disrespect the previous work that you've done. I then extended the mortises out by 1 millimeter on each side. I made a 15-degree slope template that I would then use when cutting the angles into the mortises. It's really important that there's no high spot in the center of your 15-degree slope so that when the pins do get seated in the mortise, they sit perfectly flush. The mortises on top weren't through tenons, so I had to cut them a little bit differently on the bandsaw. I removed the waste with a jigsaw and used the chisels to straighten everything out. Making sure that there's no high spots in the center so that when I drive that piece of wood in, it sits perfectly flush. Since the two pieces of the legs are so close together, it'll be nearly impossible to sand and access the inner edges of the leg. That's why I take a block plane to the edge and smooth it out now. Time to sand and finish the shelves, and I do this while it's unassembled because when it is assembled, there'll be so many tight places that I can't reach with a sander or cabinet scraper, and it's just easier to do it this way. Then I use a block plane with a chamfer guide, and I knock down all the edges of the piece. This isn't just for aesthetics, this is also to make the piece less sharp to the touch, and it prevents any kind of chip out in the future. I use Rubio Monocoat 5% white, which is a hard wax finish, super easy to apply. I like the 5% white because I feel like it leaves the natural color of the wood, and I really love the way white oak looks as is. I also finish the inside of the legs, which will be really hard to access later. Time to make the wedges. I need to thickness plane a piece of wangi to the exact width of the mortise so that when I drive in the wedges, there's no gaps. I make a wedge template, which will help me make extremely consistent and accurate wedges. Having consistent wedges is super important to the aesthetics of this piece, because when you drive in the wedges, you want them to be seated down at the same distance so that the exposed part of the wedge is the same thickness throughout the entire piece. Now it's time to assemble the piece, and this was so exciting. Also kind of scary. You hope that everything you've done up to this point works out, and thankfully for me, it did. To set the wedges, I glue all the pins. I put the long leg on. And then all that's left to do is drive the wedges, and it's just so satisfying and also a little bit scary because once you get to this point, you're not going back. Since the top of the piece isn't a through-wedged mortise and tenon, I decided to just glue and screw it. The screws will never be seen since it's on the top, and I wanted to make sure that this piece stays together forever. Instead of mashing a sander into the exposed joints, I first flush cut them with a Japanese saw. This is maybe the most exciting part of the project for me. I got to see my joints for the first time. Then I use a trim router to flush cut the top. After flush cutting the proud joints, I use a block plane to take down the bulk of the material again, a card scraper to even go further. Then all I need to do is spend maybe about a minute going over it with my sander, and it creates perfect smooth finish results. And then I finish the edges that have yet to be finished. Now my favorite part, documenting it. As I said, I work in the wood shop in the back of my photography studio, so documenting my furniture couldn't be any easier. I'm really proud of how this piece turned out. I love the way it looks and feel like I learned so much. I think my plants will be happier here too. I really enjoyed making this video. I want to make more videos. It just takes so much time. I don't know when my next one will be. But if you want to see more, please subscribe and leave a comment telling me what you think. If you want to see more of my furniture, you could scan the QR code that'll take you to my website. Thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.